There is a shelf in most medicine cabinets, or a corner of a bathroom counter, where the evidence lives. Serums, creams, tools, maybe a microcurrent device. Most of it was bought after a moment of looking in the mirror and deciding something needed to change. All of it was aimed at the face. And most of it, if we're being honest about what happens over time, produces results that seem to soften and disappear. And then more product gets bought because the assumption is that the face is where the problem lives. What if the face is just where the problem shows up? What if the wrist, specifically the position most of us hold it in for 4, 6, 8 hours a day, is one of the upstream contributors to what we watch happen on our faces over decades? I want to walk through why 3 completely separate fields of medicine have arrived independently at the same piece of anatomy, and why that convergence points to something most facial aesthetics conversations have never touched. The confusion is understandable. The face is where you see it. The wrist is where it starts. The first field to get here was surgical anatomy. Thomas Myers spent years dissecting cadavers and mapping what he called the body's fascial lines, continuous sheets of connective tissue that run the length of the body without interruption. Not metaphorically continuous, literally, a single sheet you could trace with your finger from the top of your foot, up the front of the leg, through the abdomen, across the chest, up the front of the neck, and into the tissue of the face. He called it the superficial front line. The surgeons who followed his work confirmed it. The tissue is one piece. What that means anatomically is strange. The flexor retinaculum, the dense band of fascia at the wrist that becomes the carpal tunnel when it's inflamed, is the same sheet of tissue that becomes the platysma at the jaw. Not similar tissue, not adjacent tissue, the same tissue at different addresses on the body. That's the fact the rest of this is built on. The second field to arrive here was occupational therapy, and it came from a completely different direction. Researchers studying carpal tunnel syndrome began noticing that the tension in the wrist flexors wasn't staying local. Patients with chronic wrist flexor tightness showed predictable secondary patterns: tightness in the pectoral minor, forward head posture, a kind of collapsing in the anterior chain. The wrist problem was creating a postural problem. The postural problem was creating load through the front of the body in ways that hadn't been part of the original injury model. The wrist, they found, was more like a thermostat than an isolated joint. Its position was regulating temperature across a much larger system. The third field is structural osteopathy and myofascial release, and it was already working from the top down. Practitioners treating facial tension, jaw dysfunction, and what patients described as a heaviness or pulling in the lower face kept finding that the restriction wasn't where the patient felt it. The tissue that was stuck, actually adhered, actually losing its glide, was often in the chest, the shoulder, the anterior arm. They were releasing the face and getting temporary results. They were releasing the chest and getting lasting ones. 3 separate clinical traditions, 3 separate entry points into the body, the same anatomical reality at the end of each path. One piece of tissue, one chain, and the wrist sitting at the far end of it, pulling. The way I've started thinking about this, and it's an imperfect frame, but it's the one that made it click for me, is financial. Your face is a balance sheet. It's the document that shows you the current state of an account. When you look in the mirror and see the cheekbones sitting lower than they did, when you notice the jawline looking softer, when the midface starts to feel like it's descending, you're reading an account statement. And like any account statement, what it's showing you is the accumulated result of a set of transactions that happen somewhere else. The transactions are happening at the wrist. Here's how the parallel extends. In finance, there's a difference between addressing the statement and addressing the ledger. You can do things to the statement. You can make it look better in the short term. But if the upstream entries in the ledger haven't changed, the statement will drift back toward what the ledger dictates. The balance sheet doesn't lie. It tells you what the books say. The fascia chain is the ledger. Every hour of phone grip, of keyboard use, of steering wheel position is an entry. Small entries, the kind you wouldn't notice individually. But fascia accumulates restriction the way compound interest accumulates value. Not dramatically, not in any single moment, but over time, in a direction. And after enough entries, the balance sheet reflects it. Spending on the face without addressing the wrist is paying down the visible symptoms of debt while leaving the spending behavior intact. The statement improves, the behavior continues, the statement drifts back. This isn't an argument against facial care. A balance sheet matters, but a balance sheet treated in isolation from its ledger will always be fighting upstream, which is a strange place to fight when you realize the upstream exists and is accessible. The leverage point isn't where you've been looking, it's further down the arm. Let me shift the frame, because the financial metaphor captures the economics of the situation, but not the geography. There's a better spatial image. Think of the fascial chain as a route, a hiking trail if that helps, though I want to be careful not to oversimplify what is genuinely intricate anatomy. The route runs from the fingertips to the skull. It has a trailhead, and that trailhead is the wrist. It has landmarks along the way. The flexor tendons of the forearm, the pectoral minor sitting just beneath the collarbone, the sternocleidomastoid running up the side of the neck, and finally, the SMAS layer, the fascial plane just beneath the skin of the face, the layer that surgeons lift during facelifts and that drags the cheekbones with it. The trailhead is at the wrist. For decades, most of the attention in facial aesthetics, clinical and commercial, has been focused at the destination. Needles, lasers, ultrasound devices, surgical lifts, all aimed at the face. All of them working at the destination without consulting the route. You can do a great deal at the destination. You can improve the terrain significantly. But if the trail itself is under continuous tension, if the route is being pulled taut by a restriction at the trailhead, then the work at the destination is always competing with the geography of the path. The proprioception piece is interesting here. The route has a compass. Your body is continuously sensing the tension in that chain, and that sensing is imprecise enough that most of us have never felt it as, my wrist is pulling my cheekbones. We've felt it as vague facial fatigue, as a sense that the face is working against itself, as results that seem to evaporate. The signal is in the body. The translation has been missing. What I find genuinely remarkable, and I don't say remarkable loosely, is that the route was mapped years ago in surgical theaters and research journals. It just didn't cross into the conversation happening in the places where most people make decisions about their faces. That crossing is what I think this moment is about. My grandmother had a ritual at the bathroom mirror. I don't know what she saw there, what specifically she was trying to address, but she had her products and her sequence, and she was loyal to it. She lived through most of the 20th century, and the understanding of fascial continuity as a clinical concept was still decades away from entering the literature she'd have had any access to. She didn't have the map. The information didn't exist in a form that would have reached her. My mother has a similar relationship with her mirror, a similar shelf, a similar loyalty to products aimed at the face. The research now exists. The anatomy is in the journals, but it hasn't crossed from the anatomy theater into the conversation at the bathroom counter. She has more information available to her than my grandmother did, and she is, in practice, missing the same piece. What separates the two generations isn't the availability of good products. Both of them had access to good products for their time. What separates them is a map that one generation didn't have access to, and the next generation has access to but hasn't received. The map exists. It was drawn by surgeons and osteopaths and occupational therapists working mostly separately across different halves of the last century. What they found when you lay their work side by side is the same trail, drawn from different starting points, but arriving at the same anatomy. The tenderness I feel about this, and it is tenderness, is about all the time and money and genuine hope that went into treating the destination while the route went unexamined. It's not a failure of effort, it's a failure of translation. The information was in the wrong room. So here's the minimum. The single intervention with the most mechanical leverage on the chain. You extend the wrist, palm facing away from you, fingers pointing up, and you use the opposite forearm to gently draw those fingers back toward you. Or you press the palm, flat against a wall, fingers pointing down, and you lean in until you feel the stretch run from the wrist up the inner forearm. Elbow straight, shoulders settled down, not shrugging up. 60 seconds, that's it. Not because 60 seconds is a magic number, because it's long enough for the nervous system to recognize that the restriction is being addressed and to begin releasing the guarding response that has been maintaining the tension. Fascia doesn't release in 3 seconds. It needs enough sustained input to register as a genuine mechanical event rather than a momentary perturbation. The wrist is the trailhead. It's the most distal accessible point on the anterior chain, which means it's also the point where a small input creates the largest downstream slack. Think of it in terms of the financial metaphor. This is the upstream ledger entry that changes the most downstream entries when you correct it. Not because of any mysticism about the wrist, because of mechanical advantage. The chain starts here. Releasing here reduces load across the entire route. One stretch, one direction, 60 seconds. That is the minimum effective dose for interrupting a pattern that has been running unexamined for years. The anterior chain will not transform overnight. Fascia that has been restricted for a decade does not become supple in a week. But the conversation between your wrist and your face, the continuous low-grade tension that one has been transmitting to the other, that conversation can begin to change the first time you interrupt it. There is a kind of person that emerges from understanding this. Not a different person than you already are, a more precise version. Someone who, when they think about the body, no longer divides it into zones and addresses each zone in isolation. Someone who looks at a symptom and follows it upstream before deciding where to intervene. The facial aesthetics. Industry is built, largely, on the assumption that the face is a self-contained unit, that what happens at the cheekbone starts at the cheekbone, that the solution lives in the same geography as the problem. That assumption has been profitable and partially effective and fundamentally incomplete. The person who understands the fascia chain doesn't reject facial care. They add a dimension to it. They know the balance sheet is real and worth attending to. They also know that the ledger exists and that the wrist is where you open it. The next time you look at your face and feel the pull of wanting to do something about it, there is a specific moment available to you. Your arm is right there. Your wrist is accessible. And the trail between them and your cheekbones is not a metaphor, but a piece of continuous tissue that has been waiting patiently for you to find the trailhead and begin there.